The morning sun barely touched the horizon when Emma Rodriguez walked through the gates of the military training facility. At 17 years old, she looked even younger than her age. Her small frame and quiet demeanor made her appear more like a high school student lost on a field trip than someone who had just enlisted in the armed forces. The registration officer had checked her identification 3 times, convinced there must be some mistake with her paperwork. Emma had grown up in a small town in Montana, where hunting was not just a hobby, but a way of life. Her father, a retired Army veteran, had taught her to shoot when she was barely tall enough to hold a rifle steady. Those early morning trips into the wilderness had shaped her in ways most people would never understand. While other girls her age were worried about school dances and social media followers, Emma found peace in the silence of the forest and the discipline of taking the perfect shot. Her decision to join the military had surprised everyone except her father. Teachers at her school thought she should pursue college first. Her mother worried constantly about the dangers. Friends could not understand why someone so quiet and shy would choose such a demanding path. But Emma had always felt different, like she was meant for something more than the ordinary life everyone expected her to live. The rifle range was where she felt most alive, where everything else faded away and only the target mattered. The training facility was enormous, filled with buildings that looked identical and roads that seemed to lead nowhere. Emma clutched her duffel bag tighter as she followed the signs toward the barracks. Other recruits passed by in groups, laughing and talking with the nervous energy of people starting something new together. Nobody looked at her twice. She was invisible among the crowd of eager young soldiers, just another face in the sea of new arrivals. When she reached the administration building, a sergeant with a thick mustache and eyes that had seen too many recruits come and go barely glanced up from his clipboard. He assigned her a bunk number and handed her a schedule without any welcoming words. Emma did not mind. She had never needed validation from others. The doubt in people's eyes had become familiar over the years, a constant companion that only made her more determined to prove herself. The barracks were loud and chaotic when she arrived. Recruits were claiming beds, unpacking their belongings, and sizing each other up like prize fighters before a match. Emma chose a bunk in the corner, away from the main crowd. A tall blonde woman with muscles that suggested years of athletic training took the bunk above hers. She looked down at Emma with barely concealed amusement. The woman introduced herself as Jessica, a former college volleyball player who had joined the military to follow in her brother's footsteps. She talked constantly, filling the space with stories about her training routine, her achievements in sports, and her plans to become a special forces operator. Emma listened politely but said little. She had learned long ago that talking about her skills only invited skepticism and challenges. It was better to stay quiet and let her actions speak when the time came. That evening, the commanding officer gathered all the new recruits in the main hall. Captain Morrison was exactly what Emma had expected from a military leader: tall, commanding, with a voice that could silence a room without raising in volume. He spoke about discipline, dedication, and the challenges that lay ahead. He explained that only the strongest would make it through basic training, and that weakness would not be tolerated in any form. Emma studied the faces around her. Most recruits sat up straighter during the speech, energized by the challenge. Some looked nervous, already questioning their decision. A few, like Jessica, wore expressions of supreme confidence, convinced they would excel at every test. Emma felt neither nervous nor overly confident. She simply felt ready, the same calm readiness she felt before taking any important shot. The first few days of training were designed to break down civilian habits and build military discipline. Wake-up calls came before dawn. Physical training pushed bodies to their limits. Drill sergeants shouted constantly, looking for any sign of weakness or hesitation. Emma struggled with some aspects of the training. Her small build made certain physical exercises more challenging, especially those requiring brute strength. She finished obstacle courses slower than most others and needed more time to complete push-ups and pull-ups. The other recruits noticed her struggles. Some offered encouraging words, but many simply wrote her off as someone who would not make it. Jessica stopped talking to her after the first week, apparently deciding that bunking near someone who might fail was not worth her time. Even the drill sergeants seemed to pay less attention to Emma, as if they had already categorized her as unlikely to succeed and were focusing their energy on more promising candidates. But Emma kept showing up. She arrived early to extra training sessions. She stayed late to practice the exercises that challenged her most. While others complained about the difficulty or bonded over their shared exhaustion, Emma worked silently on improving. She knew this was just the beginning, and that the real test of her abilities was still to come. The rifle range had not yet opened for the new recruits, and that was where Emma would finally show everyone what she was truly capable of achieving. On the 10th day of training, Captain Morrison announced that the following week would include weapons qualification. All recruits would be tested on various firearms, starting with basic pistol training and progressing to rifles. Emma felt her heart rate increase slightly at the news, though her face remained calm. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the chance to step out of the shadows and prove that being underestimated was sometimes the greatest advantage a person could have in a world that judged based on appearances. The shooting range was nothing like the quiet forests of Montana, where Emma had learned her craft. Concrete walls surrounded the lanes, and the smell of gunpowder hung thick in the air. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, replacing the natural sunlight that Emma preferred. But as she stood in line waiting her turn, holding the standard-issue pistol that felt awkward in her hands, she felt the familiar calm settling over her mind like a comfortable blanket. The drill instructor, Sergeant Hayes, was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and no patience for incompetence. She demonstrated the proper stance, grip, and breathing technique while the recruits watched. Emma noticed that most of her fellow soldiers were paying more attention to looking confident than actually absorbing the information. They shifted their weight, adjusted their positions, and practiced drawing imaginary weapons like characters from action movies. When the shooting began, the range erupted with noise. Recruits fired their allotted rounds, some hitting near the center of their targets, others spraying bullets wildly across the paper. Emma watched and waited, studying the way different people approached the task. She saw the ones who rushed their shots, eager to finish quickly. She observed those who tensed up, their nervousness visible in their rigid shoulders and unsteady hands. She noticed the few who had clearly shot before, their movements smooth and practiced. Emma's turn came in the afternoon. She stepped up to her assigned lane while Sergeant Hayes stood behind her with a stopwatch and scoring clipboard. The other recruits had moved on to cleaning their weapons or reviewing their scores, but a few lingered nearby, curious to see how the smallest recruit would handle the exercise. Emma could feel their eyes on her, the unspoken assumption that she would struggle floating in the air around her. She picked up the pistol and checked it with practiced efficiency, her movements precise despite the weapon being unfamiliar. The balance was different from her father's guns, the grip slightly too large for her small hands. But Emma had learned to adapt long ago. She adjusted her stance, found her breathing rhythm, and focused on the target 25 meters away. The noise of the range faded. The watching eyes disappeared. There was only the target and the path between her position and its center. Her first shot cracked through the air and punched a hole in the paper target. She did not rush to see where it landed. Instead, she maintained her focus and fired again, then again, falling into the rhythm that her body knew by heart. When her magazine emptied, she set the pistol down and stepped back, her expression unchanged. Sergeant Hayes walked to the target and examined it in silence. Several holes clustered tightly in the center ring, with only two slightly outside the perfect zone. It was not a flawless performance, but it was significantly better than most of the morning's attempts. The sergeant made notes on her clipboard without comment, then nodded for Emma to continue to the next exercise. The real change came when the recruits moved to rifles. The familiar weight of the longer weapon in Emma's hands felt like greeting an old friend. This was her domain, the place where years of early morning practice in the Montana wilderness had prepared her for exactly this moment. The rifle range extended much farther than the pistol lanes, with targets set at various distances from 50 to 300 meters. Sergeant Hayes demonstrated the prone position, the proper use of a rifle sling for stability, and the fundamentals of long-range shooting. Emma listened carefully even though she knew these principles by heart. There was always something new to learn, and underestimating any instructor was a mistake she refused to make. When the demonstration ended, the recruits lined up to take their turns at progressively distant targets. The first recruit, a muscular man named Derek, who had been one of the top performers in physical training, approached the firing line with visible confidence. He settled into position, took aim at the 50-meter target, and fired his group of shots. When the spotting scope revealed his results, Sergeant Hayes announced that 4 of his 5 shots had hit the target, with 3 in the scoring zone. Derek grinned and stood up, clearly pleased with himself. Others followed with mixed results. Jessica managed to hit the target consistently at 50 meters but struggled when the distance increased to 100. Some recruits missed the target entirely at longer ranges, their bullets kicking up dirt well short or sailing over the backstop. A few showed decent skill, clustering their shots in acceptable patterns that suggested prior hunting or shooting experience. Emma watched each attempt, learning from both successes and failures. When her name was called, Emma moved to the firing line without hesitation. She settled into the prone position, adjusting the rifle until it felt like an extension of her own body. Sergeant Hayes announced that she would start at 100 meters, skipping the 50-meter distance that had been used for most recruits. Emma suspected this was a small test, a way to see if the quiet girl who had barely spoken since arriving could handle the pressure of a more difficult challenge. She loaded her magazine, chambered around, and found her natural point of aim. Through the scope, the target appeared clearly despite the distance. Emma controlled her breathing, letting her heartbeat slow to the rhythm she had practiced thousands of times. The trigger press was smooth and deliberate. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. Before the sound had fully faded, she knew the shot had been true. She fired 4 more rounds in steady succession, each shot placed with the same careful precision. When she finished, Sergeant Hayes walked to the spotting scope and peered through it for several long seconds. Then she straightened up and looked at Emma with an expression that was difficult to read. All 5 shots had grouped within a space smaller than her fist, centered perfectly in the target's highest scoring zone. The range fell quieter. Recruits who had been chatting or cleaning their weapons looked up, sensing that something unusual had happened. Sergeant Hayes made notes on her clipboard, then instructed Emma to repeat the exercise at 200 meters. Emma complied without comment, adjusting her position and recalculating her hold. 5 more shots. 5 more perfect strikes that grouped together as if connected by invisible string. At 300 meters, the target appeared small, even through the scope. Wind had picked up slightly, adding another variable to calculate. Emma took her time, reading the environmental conditions the way her father had taught her during those cold Montana mornings. She remembered his patient voice explaining how temperature, humidity, and elevation all affected a bullet's flight. She recalled the countless hours spent learning to judge wind speed by observing flags, grass, and even the feel of air on her skin. Her first shot at 300 meters struck slightly left of center. Emma made a micro-adjustment and fired again. The second shot hit dead center. The remaining 3 rounds followed in a tight cluster that would have impressed even veteran marksmen. When Sergeant Hayes reviewed the target, she stood silently for almost a minute before returning to the firing line. The sergeant called for everyone's attention and announced Emma's scores. The range fell completely silent. Several recruits exchanged glances of disbelief. Derek crossed his arms and frowned, clearly not pleased that his earlier success had been overshadowed. Jessica stared at Emma as if seeing her for the first time, confusion replacing her earlier dismissiveness. Emma stood and cleared her weapon, her movements calm and practiced. She had not set out to make a dramatic statement or prove doubters wrong. She had simply done what she had always done since childhood, applied her skills to the task at hand without ego or fear. But as she walked back to join the other recruits, she noticed that people were looking at her differently now. The invisible girl suddenly visible in a way she had never experienced before in her military training. News traveled fast in the training facility. By dinner that evening, Emma found herself the subject of whispered conversations and curious stares. She sat at her usual spot in the corner of the cafeteria, eating quietly while groups of recruits debated whether her shooting performance had been luck or skill. Some insisted that anyone could have a good day at the range. Others argued that her groupings had been too consistent to be accidental. Emma ignored them all and focused on her meal. Captain Morrison appeared in the doorway of the cafeteria, scanning the room until his eyes found Emma. He walked directly to her table, and the dining hall fell silent as every recruit watched to see what would happen. The captain stood across from her, his expression neutral but his posture suggesting this was not a casual visit. He asked Emma to report to his office after she finished eating. She nodded and continued with her dinner as if nothing unusual had occurred. though her mind raced with possibilities about what the meeting might mean. The captain's office was sparse and functional, decorated only with military commendations and a photograph of Morrison with his unit from years past. He gestured for Emma to sit, then settled behind his desk and studied her with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. He asked about her background, her training, and her goals in the military. Emma answered honestly but without elaboration, providing facts without the emotional story that connected them. Morrison explained that Sergeant Hayes had recommended Emma for advanced marksmanship evaluation. The military was always searching for soldiers with exceptional shooting abilities, especially for specialized roles that required precision at extreme distances. He wanted to know if Emma had interest in pursuing sniper training, though he cautioned that the program was extremely demanding and had a high failure rate even among experienced soldiers. Most candidates were older, more seasoned troops who had proven themselves in multiple areas of military service. Emma felt her pulse quicken slightly, though she maintained her calm exterior. This was beyond anything she had imagined when she enlisted. Sniper training was legendary for its difficulty, a program that pushed candidates to their absolute limits mentally and physically, but it was also exactly the type of challenge that called to something deep inside her, the same instinct that had driven her to the rifle range since childhood. She told the captain she was interested and willing to accept any challenge required to prove her capabilities. The captain nodded slowly, as if he had expected this answer, but remained uncertain about his decision. He explained that she would need to pass additional evaluations before any official recommendation could be made. Her physical fitness scores would need to improve significantly. She would need to demonstrate not just shooting ability but also the mental toughness required for the role. He scheduled her for a special assessment the following week, cautioning her that this was an opportunity very few recruits ever received so early in their training. Over the next days, Emma threw herself into preparation with renewed intensity. She woke earlier than required to run extra miles. She stayed late at the gym working on strength training. During breaks when others rested, she practiced fieldcraft skills like camouflage and movement techniques. The other recruits noticed her increased dedication, and opinions about her divided sharply. Some viewed her efforts with respect, seeing determination in her actions. Others whispered that she was trying too hard, that her shooting success had gone to her head, that she would inevitably fail when the real challenges came. Jessica approached Emma one evening as she returned from an extra training session. The tall blonde woman had been distant since the range incident, but now she seemed curious rather than dismissive. She asked Emma where she had learned to shoot so well. Emma briefly explained her Montana upbringing and her father's patient instruction. Jessica listened thoughtfully, then admitted she had underestimated Emma based on her appearance and quiet demeanor. She offered to help Emma with some of the physical training challenges, sharing techniques from her volleyball and athletic background. The partnership surprised Emma, but proved valuable. Jessica knew methods for building strength efficiently and recovering from intense workouts. In return, Emma helped Jessica improve her shooting fundamentals, sharing the small details that separated adequate marksmanship from genuine precision. The two women formed an unlikely friendship built on mutual respect and shared determination to exceed the expectations placed on female soldiers in a traditionally male-dominated field. The special assessment arrived on a gray morning with clouds threatening rain. Emma reported to a different section of the facility, where a small group of officers and senior enlisted soldiers waited. Among them was a master sergeant named Chen, whose reputation as a sniper instructor was well known even among new recruits. Chen had served multiple combat deployments and trained some of the military's most skilled marksmen. His presence made clear that this evaluation was serious business. The assessment began with physical challenges designed to test endurance under stress. Emma ran obstacle courses while carrying weighted packs. She completed exercises in full gear under time pressure. Her smaller frame made some tasks more difficult, but her determination never wavered. She pushed through muscle fatigue and burning lungs, refusing to quit no matter how much her body protested. The observers took notes but offered no encouragement or criticism, their faces remaining professionally neutral throughout. Next came mental evaluations. Emma solved complex mathematical problems while enduring distractions and time pressure. She answered questions about tactical scenarios and decision-making under stress. She completed memory tests that required recalling detailed information after brief observation periods. The questions came rapidly, designed to overwhelm and confuse, but Emma's mind remained clear and focused. She had spent her childhood learning patience in the forest, waiting for the perfect moment to take a shot, and that same patience served her now. The final phase brought her back to the rifle range, but this time under very different conditions. Master Sergeant Chen explained that she would engage targets at distances up to 600 meters, while dealing with various environmental factors and time constraints. She would need to calculate wind, elevation, and range quickly, while maintaining the precision she had demonstrated earlier. Additionally, she would complete the shooting after physically exhausting exercises to simulate real-world conditions where snipers often had to perform after long movements or stressful situations. Emma completed a grueling series of sprints and exercises until sweat soaked her uniform and her muscles trembled with fatigue. Then, still breathing heavily, she moved to the firing position and received her first target assignment. Through the scope, she could see the wind flags indicating a strong crosswind. Her hand shook slightly from exhaustion as she calculated the necessary adjustments. She took a deep breath, forcing her body to steady, and pressed the trigger. The first shot struck slightly wide of center. Emma adjusted and fired again. This time the bullet found its mark precisely. She continued through multiple targets at varying distances, her performance remaining consistent despite her physical exhaustion. Each calculation had to be made quickly, each shot taken within strict time limits. But Emma's mind worked through the problems with the methodical precision she had developed over years of practice. At the 600-meter line, Chen called out a target and started his stopwatch. Emma acquired the target through her scope, calculated the necessary holds for wind and distance, steadied her breathing, and fired. The shot took longer to reach the target at this distance, time stretching out as the bullet flew through the air. Then came the distinctive sound of metal striking metal as her round hit the target dead center. Chen stopped his stopwatch and walked to the spotting scope. He studied the target for a long moment, then made notes on his evaluation sheet. He called Emma over and showed her the results. Despite her exhaustion and the difficult conditions, she had maintained groupings that would have been impressive for any shooter, let alone a recruit still in basic training. Chen's expression remained professional, but Emma noticed the slightest nod of approval before he dismissed her. As she walked back to the barracks, Emma felt the weight of what had just happened beginning to settle. She had performed well, perhaps well enough to actually receive a recommendation for sniper school. But she also knew that the real challenges still lay ahead. If selected, she would enter a program designed to test every limit of human endurance and skill. She would face instructors who had seen countless candidates fail. She would compete against soldiers with more experience, more physical strength, and more reason to believe they belonged there. Yet Emma felt ready. The doubt others carried about her abilities had never infected her own self-assessment. She knew her strengths and acknowledged her weaknesses. She understood that being underestimated could be an advantage, allowing her to work quietly while others dismissed her as unworthy of concern. And she carried within her the memory of countless Montana mornings, the patient voice of her father teaching her that true skill came not from natural talent alone, but from dedication, practice, and the willingness to take one more shot even when your body screamed. 3 weeks passed before Emma received the official notification. She was cleaning her rifle in the armory when Captain Morrison found her and handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was her assignment to the United States Army Sniper School, beginning in 2 months after she completed basic training. The letter outlined the program requirements, physical standards, and a blunt warning that most candidates did not complete the course successfully. Emma read it twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in her footlocker like a treasure she wanted to protect. The remaining weeks of basic training took on new meaning. Emma knew that her current challenges were merely preparation for what awaited at sniper school. She continued pushing herself in every area, but now with specific focus on skills that would matter most. She practiced estimating distances without aids, trained her memory for detailed recall, and worked on remaining motionless for extended periods. Jessica often joined her, and their friendship deepened through shared struggle and mutual encouragement. When graduation from basic training arrived, Emma's family made the long drive from Montana to attend the ceremony. Her father stood in his old uniform, pride evident in his weathered face despite his attempts to maintain military bearing. Her mother cried openly, torn between joy at her daughter's achievement and fear about the dangerous path she had chosen. Emma's younger brother peppered her with questions about guns and training, his admiration for his sister obvious in every excited word. Emma told them about sniper school during their brief visit. Her father's expression grew serious as he listened, understanding better than the others what she would face. He pulled her aside that evening and talked to her about the mental demands of the sniper role, the loneliness of operating in small teams, and the weight of responsibility that came with the position. He reminded her that shooting paper targets and hunting animals were entirely different from what she might eventually face in combat. Emma listened carefully, appreciating his honesty even as it confirmed her commitment to this path. The journey to sniper school took her across the country to Fort Benning, Georgia. The facility was different from her basic training location, with specialized ranges that extended for miles into wilderness areas. Emma arrived 2 days before the course officially began, using the extra time to acclimate to the humid southern climate that felt foreign after Montana's dry air. She explored the areas she was allowed to access, noting the terrain features and vegetation that would become intimately familiar in the coming weeks. On the first morning of sniper school, Emma joined 19 other soldiers in a classroom where they would receive their initial briefing. She was the only woman in the group, a fact that drew immediate attention from several candidates. Most of the others were older than her by at least 5 years, many by a decade or more. They carried themselves with the confidence of experienced soldiers who had already proven themselves in various military capacities. Some had deployed to combat zones. Others had excelled in special operations or reconnaissance units. The lead instructor, Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, entered the room and the casual conversations immediately ceased. Rodriguez was legendary in sniper circles, a man who had survived multiple deployments and trained hundreds of students. His first words to the class were blunt and uncompromising. He explained that sniper school had approximately a 40% graduation rate. Many would quit voluntarily. Others would be removed for failure to meet standards. The course was designed to identify not just skilled shooters but complete soldiers who could operate independently under extreme conditions. Rodriguez outlined the program phases. First would come marksmanship fundamentals, building on existing skills with precision techniques required for extreme distances. Then fieldcraft training, teaching camouflage, stalking, and concealment methods. Navigation and land warfare skills would follow, ensuring snipers could operate in any terrain. Finally, culminating exercises would test everything learned under realistic conditions. Each phase had specific requirements, and failure in any area meant removal from the course. The first week focused entirely on rifle familiarization and marksmanship basics. Even experienced shooters had habits that needed correction. Emma absorbed every lesson, her previous training providing foundation but not making her complacent. She noticed early that several candidates treated the initial instruction as beneath them, their confidence leading to carelessness. Rodriguez noticed too, his sharp eyes missing nothing as he evaluated each student with brutal honesty. Shooting exercises began at known distances, allowing students to establish zeros and develop consistency. Emma's groups were tight and centered, drawing approving nods from instructors. But she noticed that several other candidates shot equally well or better, reminding her that she was no longer competing against basic training recruits, but against highly skilled soldiers specifically selected for this demanding program. A man named Sergeant Miller, who had 8 years of service and multiple combat deployments, consistently outshot everyone at distances under 500 meters. The real differentiation came when distances increased and variables multiplied. At 800 meters with shifting winds, many candidates struggled to maintain their earlier precision. Emma calculated each shot carefully, applying principles her father had taught her but also new techniques learned from Rodriguez and his team. Her shots remained consistent, punching through targets with satisfying regularity, but so did Miller's, and those of a quiet Native American soldier named Reyes, who seemed to read wind patterns as if they spoke directly to him. Physical challenges intensified in the second week. Students hiked long distances carrying heavy packs and weapons. They completed obstacle courses in full gear under time pressure. They practiced immediate action drills and rapid target engagement. Emma's smaller size remained a disadvantage in some areas, but her endurance surprised many who had assumed she would struggle. Hours of extra training during basic had built her stamina. and her mental toughness allowed her to push through pain that made larger soldiers quit. One afternoon, Rodriguez assembled the class for a special exercise. They would complete a 12-mile forced march in full gear, followed immediately by precision shooting at 600 meters. Any candidate who failed to complete the march within the time limit or missed their shooting standard would receive a negative evaluation. 3 negative evaluations meant removal from the course. The announcement created tension among students who had begun to feel confident in their abilities. The march was brutal. Georgia heat pressed down like physical weight. The path led through wooded terrain, across streams and over hills that seemed designed to sap strength and break spirits. Emma settled into a steady pace, neither trying to lead nor falling behind. She focused on controlling her breathing and managing her energy expenditure. Around her, several candidates pushed too hard early and paid the price later. Others talked constantly, wasting breath on complaints and bravado. By mile 8, 3 candidates had dropped out, unable to continue. By mile 10, several more were struggling badly, their pace slowing dangerously as the time limit approached. Emma's legs burned and her shoulders ached from the pack weight, but she maintained her rhythm. She thought about Montana mornings, about hours spent hiking through snow to reach hunting spots, about her father's lessons on mental endurance. The discomfort was temporary. The goal was everything. She crossed the finish line with 4 minutes remaining before the cutoff. Her uniform was soaked with sweat and her muscles trembled with fatigue, but she had no time to recover. Rodriguez immediately directed her to a firing position and pointed to a target 600 meters distant. Emma dropped into prone position, her body screaming protests about the sudden stop after continuous movement. Her hand shook as she loaded her rifle. Her vision seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. Through the scope, the target wavered and blurred. Emma closed her eyes for 3 seconds, forcing her mind to override her body's rebellion. She opened them again and focused on the fundamentals. Breathing control, natural point of aim, smooth trigger press. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The bullet flew true, striking the target in the high-scoring zone. Rodriguez grunted acknowledgement and marked her scorecard. She had passed, but just barely. The combination of physical exhaustion and immediate precision shooting had pushed her closer to her limits than anything she had previously experienced. That evening in the barracks, only 14 candidates remained from the original 20. Some had quit during the march. Others had failed the shooting standard. The survivors sat in quiet exhaustion, too tired even for conversation. Emma lay on her bunk and stared at the ceiling, processing everything she had learned. She was still here, still competing, but the margin for error was razor thin. Miller had shot expert scores despite the exhaustion. Reyes had finished the march 10 minutes ahead of most others. These were not opponents she could defeat through determination alone. She would need to elevate every aspect of her performance. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway and informed them that the next day would begin stalking exercises, widely considered the most difficult portion of med to stop. Training. Students would need to move hundreds of meters across open terrain without being detected by instructors equipped with optics and intimate knowledge of the training area. They would need to construct firing positions and engage targets while remaining completely concealed. Most students accumulated negative evaluations during stalking, and many who excelled at marksmanship failed completely in fieldcraft. Emma had read about stalking exercises during her preparation, but words on paper could not convey the difficulty of moving invisibly across terrain, while trained observers searched for any mistake. She would need to become part of the landscape, surrendering her human form to merge with grass, dirt, and shadow. The thought should have intimidated her, but instead she felt a strange excitement. This was the ultimate test of patience and discipline, qualities she had cultivated throughout her life. Tomorrow would reveal whether the quiet Montana girl could disappear completely into the Georgia wilderness. The stalking lane stretched across 200 meters of mixed terrain. Tall grass, scattered bushes, and occasional depressions in the ground provided potential concealment, but the instructors positioned on an elevated observation post could see the entire area with powerful optics. Their job was to detect any movement, any unnatural shadow, any detail that revealed a hidden student attempting to reach the designated firing position. Rodriguez explained that students would enter the lane one at a time, attempting to advance to within 200 meters of a target without being spotted. Those who succeeded would take 2 shots, then attempt to reposition and leave the area undetected. Emma watched as the first candidate, a muscular sergeant named Davis, entered the lane. He moved quickly at first, using vegetation for cover and crawling when necessary. Within 15 minutes, an instructor's voice crackled over the radio announcing that Davis had been spotted. His attempt was over. He would receive detailed feedback later, but for now he simply walked off the lane in frustration. The pattern repeated with the next candidate, then the next. Some lasted longer than Davis, but all were eventually detected before reaching the firing position. Miller entered the lane with confidence born from experience. His movements were careful and deliberate, using terrain features intelligently and maintaining discipline even when progress seemed impossibly slow. Emma watched through binoculars from the student observation area, studying his technique. He made it nearly to the firing position before an instructor spotted an unnatural shadow created by his pack. Miller was closer than anyone else had managed, but still failed the exercise. He exited the lane with obvious disappointment etched on his face. When Emma's turn came, she approached the starting point with her rifle, ghillie suit components, and equipment carefully arranged. The instructors had briefed them on constructing personal camouflage, and Emma had spent hours the previous night preparing natural vegetation and materials that matched the lane's environment. She wore earth-toned clothing beneath vegetation strips that would help break up her human outline. In her pack were additional materials for constructing a firing position once she reached the target area. Rodriguez gave her a final inspection, checking her equipment and reviewing the requirements. He reminded her that movement discipline was more important than speed, that patience was the sniper's greatest tool, that most failures came from rushing rather than from lack of skill. Emma nodded her understanding, then entered the lane as he started his stopwatch. Students had 4 hours to complete the exercise, time that seemed generous until one understood how slowly a person must move to remain invisible. Emma dropped to the ground immediately, becoming horizontal rather than vertical in the landscape. She began crawling forward using a modified technique her father had taught her for hunting, moving only inches at a time and freezing completely whenever instinct suggested the instructors might be scanning her area. The tall grass became her ally, concealing her progress when she stayed low enough. She used her rifle as a probe, gently parting vegetation ahead rather than pushing through it and creating obvious disturbance. 30 minutes passed. Emma had covered perhaps 25 meters. Her progress felt agonizingly slow, but she refused to rush. She could hear other students on distant lanes, occasional bursts of radio traffic when instructors spotted movement. Each detection announcement served as a reminder of how easily mistakes revealed themselves to trained observers. Emma controlled her breathing, maintained her patience, and continued her microscopic advance across the terrain. A depression in the ground offered opportunity for faster movement. Emma slithered into it like a snake, using the natural concealment to cover 10 meters in just a few minutes. But she knew the depression would end soon, and the exposed section beyond would be dangerous. She spent several minutes at the edge, studying the next area through tiny gaps in the vegetation. She identified a small bush that would provide her next cover point, planning her route to reach it while minimizing exposure. The crossing took nearly 40 minutes. Emma moved in increments so small that even she sometimes questioned whether she was making progress. Her body screamed complaints about the awkward positions and constant tension. Sweat dripped into her eyes. Small rocks pressed painfully into her elbows and knees. But she ignored the discomfort and maintained absolute discipline. In her mind, she returned to those Montana forests, remembering how she had learned to move through wilderness without disturbing deer that could detect the slightest wrong movement. 2 hours into the exercise, Emma estimated she had covered about half the required distance. Her muscles ached and her patience was being tested in ways even she had not anticipated. But she could see her target now through the vegetation, a distant shape that represented her goal. More importantly, she had not been detected. The radio remained silent about her lane. She was still invisible, still in the exercise, still advancing toward her objective. The final 100 meters proved most challenging. The terrain offered less natural concealment, and Emma knew the instructors would focus their attention on the area closest to the firing position. She selected each movement with extreme care, sometimes remaining motionless for 10 minutes before advancing a single meter. She used shadows, slight depressions in the ground, and careful placement of vegetation from her ghillie suit to maintain her camouflage. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, hours feeling like minutes while individual seconds felt eternal. With 30 minutes remaining in her 4-hour window, Emma reached the area where she could construct her firing position. She used vegetation and natural materials to build a hide that would conceal her completely, while allowing her to engage the target. Her hands worked slowly and deliberately, placing each element with consideration for how it would appear through the instructor's optics. She created loopholes for her rifle and observation, ensuring they appeared as natural shadows rather than artificial openings. When her position was complete, Emma settled behind her rifle and acquired the target through her scope. Her breathing had steadied despite the long crawl. Her hands were surprisingly stable considering the physical effort she had expended. She calculated the distance, checked the wind indicators she could see, and prepared for her shots. But before firing, she keyed her radio and announced her readiness, as required by the exercise protocol. Rodriguez's voice came back over the radio, asking her to identify her position. Emma provided the coordinates based on her map reading. A long silence followed. She could imagine the instructors scanning the area with their optics, searching for any sign of her hide. Minutes passed. Finally, Rodriguez's voice returned, tinged with what might have been surprise. He confirmed they had located her position, but only after she had identified herself. He authorized her to take her shots. Emma fired twice in quick succession, both rounds striking the target in the designated scoring zones. The sharp reports of her rifle were the first sound she had made in over 3 hours. She immediately began her exfiltration, reversing her careful process to leave the area as invisibly as she had entered. The exit proved equally challenging, requiring another hour of painstaking movement before she reached the designated endpoint and could finally stand upright. Rodriguez met her as she emerged from the lane. His expression was carefully neutral, but he reviewed her performance with evident approval. She had completed the stalk successfully, one of only 3 students to do so that day. Her shooting had been accurate. Her hide construction had been excellent. Her movement discipline had been nearly perfect. He marked her scorecard with a passing grade and told her to rest before the next day's training. That evening, the atmosphere in the barracks was subdued. Several more candidates had been removed from the program after accumulating too many negative evaluations. Only 11 remained from the original 20. The survivors shared a quiet understanding that they had crossed a significant threshold. Miller congratulated Emma on her successful stalk, admitting that he had underestimated her when they first met. Reyes simply nodded at her with respect, a gesture that meant more than lengthy praise from someone of his skill level. The first day passed without major incident. Emma and Reyes moved carefully through wooded terrain, using map and compass to navigate while avoiding trails and obvious routes. They saw signs of other teams and opposing forces but successfully evaded detection. By nightfall, they had reached their primary objective area and began scouting for a suitable observation post location. They selected a position on elevated ground with good visibility of the target area, but sufficient vegetation for concealment. Construction of their hide took most of the night. They worked in shifts, one building while the other provided security. Emma used techniques learned during stalking exercises, enhanced by Reyes's combat experience. By morning, they had created a position that allowed observation and shooting, while remaining virtually invisible from any direction. They settled in for what they knew would be long hours of watching and waiting. The second day tested their patience more than their physical abilities. They observed the target area through optics, documenting activity and waiting for their designated targets to appear. Hours passed with nothing happening. The hide grew uncomfortable despite their best efforts. The temperature rose, making their concealment feel like an oven. But they maintained discipline, taking turns on watch while the other rested in cramped quarters behind their position. Late in the afternoon, their target appeared. A person wearing the designated uniform entered the observation area at approximately 800 meters distance. Emma was on watch. She alerted Reyes quietly, and they both confirmed the target identification. This was their moment. Everything they had learned would now be tested in a single shot, taken under realistic conditions with evaluators watching their performance. Emma settled behind her rifle while Reyes served as her spotter, calling wind and confirming range. Emma's breathing slowed to the rhythm she had practiced thousands of times. Through her scope, the target appeared clearly despite the distance. Reyes whispered wind calls and range confirmation, his voice barely audible even though they were inches apart. Emma made micro-adjustments to her position, ensuring her natural point of aim aligned perfectly with the target. Her finger found the trigger, applying pressure so gradually that even she could not predict the exact moment the rifle would fire. The shot broke clean. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder. Through the scope, Emma watched the target react, the hit confirmed by evaluators monitoring the exercise. Reyes marked their databook with the successful engagement, noting conditions and results. But they could not celebrate. Protocol required immediate repositioning after firing to avoid counter-detection by opposing forces. They began the careful process of dismantling their hide and preparing to move. 20 minutes later, they heard voices approaching their former position. The opposing force had triangulated their shot and come searching. But Emma and Reyes were already 200 meters away, moving through terrain they had pre-selected during planning. They evaded the searchers and continued toward their extraction point, navigating through darkness using night vision and careful map work. By midnight, they had reached the designated area and called for pickup, their mission complete. Rodriguez and other instructors met them at the extraction point. The evaluation was thorough and immediate. They reviewed every aspect of the mission from movement techniques to hide construction to the final shot. Emma and Reyes had executed nearly flawlessly, one of only 4 teams to complete their mission successfully. The other 7 teams had either been detected, failed to engage their targets, or made critical errors in fieldcraft or navigation. The final days of sniper school brought graduation preparations and final evaluations. Emma stood in formation with the remaining students, only 9 from the original 20. They had survived weeks of brutal testing, emerging as qualified military snipers. The graduation ceremony was simple and professional, attended by senior officers and previous graduates. Each student received their sniper qualification badge, a small piece of metal that represented enormous effort and sacrifice. Emma's family could not attend due to the distance and short notice, but her father called that evening. His pride was evident even through the phone connection. He asked about specific aspects of her training, the kind of detailed questions only another sniper would know to ask. Emma answered honestly, describing both her successes and the moments when she had struggled. Her father reminded her that graduation was not an ending but a beginning, that maintaining skills required constant practice, and that the responsibility of the sniper role demanded lifelong learning and growth. Her first assignment took her to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where she joined an infantry battalion as part of their sniper section. The team leader, Staff Sergeant Thompson, was a combat veteran with 2 deployments and a no-nonsense approach to training. He expressed surprise at her age and relatively brief service time, but reviewed her qualification scores and graduation ranking with evident approval. He paired her with an experienced spotter named Corporal Jackson, telling them they would have 3 months to develop their partnership before the unit deployed overseas. Jackson was initially skeptical about working with someone so young and inexperienced in operational environments, but he had seen enough in the military to know that resumes meant less than performance. They began training together immediately, running exercises at the base ranges and conducting field problems in surrounding terrain. Emma's skills impressed Jackson, particularly her mathematical ability for calculating complex ballistic solutions and her patience during long observation periods. He began to trust her, sharing knowledge accumulated through multiple combat tours. The deployment to Afghanistan came sooner than expected. Regional instability required their battalion to reinforce forces already in country. Emma packed her equipment with careful attention, ensuring nothing was forgotten or inadequately maintained. This would be her first time in a combat zone, the transition from training environments to places where people actually tried to kill you. The abstract suddenly becoming concrete. She felt nervous but ready, her confidence built on solid preparation and proven skills. Afghanistan was everything and nothing like Emma had imagined. The heat was oppressive during the day, the cold brutal at night. The terrain was mountainous and unforgiving, requiring difficult movements with heavy equipment. The base was a mixture of temporary structures and fortified positions, showing signs of years of conflict. Emma and Jackson settled into their section's area, and immediately began operational briefings. The battalion's mission involved securing a region where insurgent activity had increased, requiring observation and precision engagement of enemy forces. Their first operation came within a week of arrival. Emma and Jackson joined an infantry patrol moving to establish an observation post overlooking a valley where insurgent movement had been reported. They hiked for hours through mountainous terrain, the weight of their equipment and the altitude making every step a challenge. Emma focused on maintaining pace and managing her breathing in the thin air. This was real. The people they might observe could shoot back. The stakes were no longer about passing or failing, but about life and death. The observation post was established on a ridge line with good visibility across the valley. Emma and Jackson set up their position while infantry soldiers secured the perimeter and established defensive positions. Through their optics, they could see the valley floor and the small village where intelligence suggested insurgents were operating. Their mission was to observe, document activity, and engage any confirmed enemy combatants if opportunity presented. The first 2 days passed slowly. They saw villagers going about daily activities, children playing, farmers working fields, but they also noted individuals whose behavior suggested military training, men who moved with purpose and carried themselves differently from civilian farmers. Jackson documented everything in their logbook while Emma maintained observation. They worked in shifts, one always watching while the other rested or performed necessary tasks. On the third morning, their patience was rewarded. A group of armed men appeared in the valley, moving with tactical discipline toward a position that would allow them to attack the main road used by coalition forces. Jackson confirmed through his optics that they carried weapons and wore equipment consistent with insurgent fighters. He radioed the information to command, receiving authorization to engage if safe and effective opportunity presented. Emma settled behind her rifle, her heart rate elevated, but her hands steady. This was different from every training exercise. These were actual people in her crosshairs, individuals who had made choices that placed them in opposition to her mission and her unit. She thought briefly about the moral weight of what she was about to do, then set those thoughts aside. Her commanders had confirmed these were legitimate targets. Her unit depended on her to perform her role. Hesitation could cost friendly lives. The range was approximately 900 meters. Wind conditions were moderate but variable. Emma calculated her hold, factoring in altitude, temperature, and the ballistic characteristics of her rifle and ammunition. Jackson confirmed her calculations and called the wind. They had trained for exactly this scenario hundreds of times, but training had not prepared Emma for the emotional complexity of the moment. She breathed slowly, controlled her heartbeat, and applied pressure to the trigger. The rifle fired. Through the scope, Emma saw the bullet's impact. The target collapsed. The other insurgents scattered, searching for cover and trying to locate the sniper position. Jackson was already tracking a second target, calling adjustments. Emma cycled her bolt, chambered a fresh round, and acquired the new target. Another calculation. Another shot. Another hit. The engagement lasted less than 3 minutes before the remaining insurgents disappeared from view, leaving 2 casualties and abandoning their planned attack. Command confirmed the engagement through other observation assets. Emma and Jackson had successfully interdicted an enemy force planning to attack friendly units. Their shooting had been accurate. Their target identification had been correct. They had performed their mission exactly as trained. But as the adrenaline faded, Emma felt the weight of what had happened settling on her shoulders. She had taken human lives. The abstract concept of combat had become concrete reality. She sat quietly in their position, processing emotions she could not fully name. Jackson saw her expression and spoke quietly. He explained that what she was feeling was normal, that every good soldier struggled with the reality of killing even when necessary and justified. He told her about his own first combat engagement and the complex emotions that had followed. He reminded her that those men had been planning to kill Americans, that her actions had saved friendly lives, that moral certainty was rare in war, but mission accomplishment was essential. Emma listened and nodded, grateful for his experience and wisdom. The patrol returned to base 2 days later. Thompson debriefed Emma and Jackson thoroughly, reviewing their performance and confirming the engagement details. He told Emma that she had performed well, that her shooting had been professional and effective, that the battalion commander had specifically mentioned their success. But he also checked on her emotional state, ensuring she had the support needed to process her first combat engagement. Emma appreciated his concern while also wanting to move forward and focus on the mission. Word spread quickly through the unit about the successful sniper engagement. Soldiers who had previously viewed Emma with curiosity or skepticism now treated her with respect earned through performance. She had proven herself not just in training environments but in actual combat, the ultimate validation for any soldier. But Emma remained modest about her role, understanding that success had come from preparation, teamwork with Jackson, and support from the entire unit. Individual achievement in combat was always a team effort. The deployment continued through changing seasons and evolving tactical situations. Emma participated in multiple operations, each one adding to her experience and confidence. She learned to adapt to different terrain, weather conditions, and tactical scenarios. Her partnership with Jackson strengthened through shared challenges and mutual trust. Thompson increasingly relied on their team for critical observation and engagement missions, recognizing their effectiveness and professionalism. 6 months into the deployment, Battalion Headquarters received intelligence about a high-value target operating in a remote mountain region. The individual was a senior insurgent leader responsible for coordinating attacks across multiple provinces. Coalition forces had been tracking him for months, but he moved carefully and rarely exposed himself to observation. Intelligence suggested he would be meeting with other leaders at a compound in an isolated valley, providing a rare opportunity for engagement. The operation required a long-range infiltration by a small team, capable of reaching an observation position overlooking the compound. The distance from any friendly base meant the team would need to operate independently for several days, relying entirely on their own skills and resources. Thompson selected Emma and Jackson for the mission, pairing them with 2 infantry soldiers for security. The risk was significant, but the potential value of eliminating the target justified the danger. Planning took 3 days. They studied satellite imagery, weather forecasts, and intelligence reports. The compound was located in a valley at approximately 1,400 meters elevation, surrounded by mountains that provided potential observation positions. However, reaching those positions required crossing hostile territory and establishing hides that could remain undetected for days. Emma and Jackson identified a ridgeline that would provide observation at a range of approximately 1,800 meters, an extreme distance that would test the limits of their equipment and skill. The team infiltrated at night, moving through mountain passes using night vision and careful navigation. They carried heavy loads including weapons, ammunition, observation equipment, food, water, and materials for constructing a long-term hide. The movement was exhausting, requiring frequent stops to rest and manage their energy. Emma's smaller frame made the load particularly challenging, but she maintained pace through sheer determination and efficient movement techniques. By dawn of the second day, they had reached their designated area. While the infantry soldiers established a small security position, Emma and Jackson began constructing their observation hide. The location they had selected offered excellent visibility of the target compound, but required extensive work to create proper concealment. They spent hours carefully arranging natural materials, ensuring their position would be invisible from any direction, including aerial observation. The hide was barely large enough for 2 people and their equipment. Emma and Jackson would live in this tiny space for up to 5 days, maintaining constant observation while remaining completely hidden. They established routines for eating, sleeping, and managing waste without compromising their concealment. The infantry security team positioned themselves 50 meters away, ready to provide support if the sniper team was discovered, but far enough to avoid drawing attention to the hide. Through their high-powered spotting scope, Emma could see the compound clearly despite the extreme distance. The buildings were simple mud brick structures typical of the region. A few vehicles were parked nearby. Occasional individuals moved about, but none matched the physical description of their target. Emma and Jackson settled into the patient watching that defined much of sniper work, hours of observation punctuated by moments of intense activity. 2 days passed with no sign of the target. The hide grew increasingly uncomfortable. The temperature fluctuated wildly between hot days and freezing nights. Limited movement created muscle stiffness and fatigue. But Emma and Jackson maintained their discipline, continuing observation rotations and documenting all activity at the compound. Command radioed daily updates confirming that intelligence still indicated the meeting would occur, though the exact timing remained uncertain. On the morning of the fourth day, activity at the compound increased noticeably. Additional vehicles arrived. More people appeared, their body language suggesting importance and security consciousness. Jackson studied each individual through the spotting scope, comparing them to reference photographs of known insurgent leaders. Emma maintained observation through her rifle scope, ready to engage if Jackson identified their target. Hours passed as the meeting apparently progressed inside the compound buildings. Emma and Jackson discussed engagement scenarios, calculating solutions for different possible shooting positions and environmental conditions. The range of 1,800 meters was at the extreme edge of their capability, requiring perfect execution of fundamentals and favorable conditions. Wind at the target area would be difficult to judge with certainty at such distance. The slightest error in calculation would result in a miss, potentially alerting the target to their presence without accomplishing the mission. Late in the afternoon, a man emerged from the central building. Jackson studied him intensely through the spotting scope, comparing physical features to their reference materials. The distinctive scar on the left side of the face, the particular way of walking, the gray beard trimmed in a specific style. Jackson's voice was calm but certain when he confirmed target identification. This was their objective, the senior leader whose elimination could disrupt insurgent operations across the entire region. Emma's focus narrowed to absolute clarity. Everything else ceased to exist except the target, the distance, and the environmental factors affecting bullet flight. Jackson called wind estimates based on multiple indicators visible through the spotting scope. Emma calculated the ballistic solution, factoring in the extreme range, the altitude, the temperature, and the wind values. The mathematics were complex, but her mind worked through them with practiced efficiency, developed through years of training and months of operational experience. The target stood relatively still, speaking with another individual. This was the moment. Emma controlled her breathing, letting her heart rate slow. She adjusted her position minutely, ensuring perfect alignment. Her finger found the trigger. Jackson called final confirmations. Emma applied pressure gradually, inevitably, until the rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed through the mountains. The bullet's flight time at 1,800 meters was approximately 2.5 seconds. Emma maintained her sight picture, watching through the scope as the projectile covered the enormous distance. The target suddenly collapsed. Through the spotting scope, Jackson saw the impact and confirmed the hit. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Then chaos erupted at the compound as people rushed to the fallen leader, searching for threats and trying to understand what had happened. Emma cycled her bolt and chambered another round, ready for follow-up shots if needed. But Jackson was already directing their immediate actions. The compound was too far away for them to hear the shot directly. But the insurgents would soon determine the general direction and possibly organize a search. The team needed to begin their exfiltration immediately while confusion still reigned. Emma and Jackson carefully dismantled their hide, ensuring they left no equipment or obvious evidence of their position. The return movement was faster than the infiltration had been, driven by urgency to reach friendly territory before insurgent forces could react effectively. The team moved through the night, navigating by GPS and natural features. They maintained security awareness while making best possible speed through difficult terrain. Emma's exhaustion was profound after 4 days of minimal sleep and constant tension, but adrenaline and discipline kept her moving. They reached a pickup point at dawn, where helicopters extracted them back to base. Intelligence analysts immediately debriefed the team, confirming through multiple sources that the target had been killed by a single long-range shot. Initial reports from the compound indicated complete confusion about the source of fire, with some insurgents believing it had been an airstrike or drone attack. The extreme range had made it virtually impossible for them to accurately locate the sniper position. The battalion commander personally congratulated Emma and Jackson, recognizing the significance of their achievement. An 1,800-meter combat shot was exceptional by any standard, representing the extreme edge of modern sniper capability. But more importantly, they had eliminated a target whose removal would save friendly lives and disrupt enemy operations. The mission had been a complete success, executed with professionalism and precision under extremely challenging conditions. News of the engagement spread through military channels. Sniper instructors at training schools discussed the technical aspects of the shot. Unit commanders referenced it as an example of effective special operations integration with conventional forces. Military publications requested interviews, wanting to document the youngest sniper to achieve such an extraordinary combat engagement. Emma declined most requests, uncomfortable with attention and preferring to focus on her mission and her team. The deployment ended 3 months later. Emma returned to the United States with combat experience, proven skills, and a service record that exceeded anything she had imagined when first enlisting. She was promoted and received commendations for her performance, but the recognition that mattered most came from her fellow soldiers, the quiet respect of professionals who had served alongside her and witnessed her dedication and capability. Her father met her at the airport when she returned home on leave. They embraced without words, both understanding things that could never be fully explained to those who had not experienced them. Later, they drove to the Montana forests where Emma had first learned to shoot all those years ago. They walked the familiar trails in comfortable silence. Two shooters who understood that the rifle was simply a tool, that true skill came from patience and discipline, and that the hardest targets were often those placed by life itself, rather than by enemies. Emma continued her military service, training new snipers and deploying on additional missions. She never forgot being the youngest person in rooms full of skeptics, the quiet girl who nobody took seriously until her rounds found their marks at distances others thought impossible. That experience shaped her approach to everything that followed, teaching her that underestimation could be an advantage, that patience outlasted flash, and that the most powerful response to doubt was simply delivering results when the stakes were highest and the target most distant. The record books would show her 1,800-meter shot, but Emma knew the real measurement of her achievement was not the distance, but the journey that had prepared her to take it when the moment arrived.